You're not? Where are you from?
Idaho.
Yeah, we already got rid of our Idaho story, because this was Idaho, and hanging the sheriff here got us out of Idaho.
Oh, wow.
So we're going to talk about hanging the sheriff here soon. But in the scheme of the gold rush, there is no agriculture here. There's no agriculture in Idaho either. These people are fed from Salt Lake City. There's a little bit going on in the Bitterroot by that period of time, and there is a beef industry in Montana in the Bitterroot and Deer Lodge, but there's really no one growing crops for the market. These people are fed from Salt Lake City. It makes it a very, very expensive proposition to get your food. The governor's wife said $4 a pound for butter here in 1864. They tell me today that would equate to about $96 a pound butter. So it's a very, very expensive place to live because everything had to be imported. I always get a kick out of this bar too, because this top is one piece of wood. We don't have hardwood trees in Montana, number one. And this whole thing would have been brought here on a wagon. I mean, I think the story of freighting is absolutely phenomenal. I mean, how they got their stuff here. We're going to see mining equipment coming up. I mean, we had dredges out there on that creek. There were 5 dredge boats out there. A single bucket on a dredge would weigh you about 160 pounds. There's 40 buckets on that dredge. I mean, just thinking about the weight that they were carrying in here was absolutely phenomenal. So we want to go on to a different story. Crime and violence are part of the gold rush. That is a common story of the gold rush. All the gold rush, and the gold rush is a 50-year American experience, have different challenges depending on where you go. Crime and violence is a standard in the gold rush. But our response here in what became Montana was a little unique, because they hanged at least 25 men in 6 weeks. And it makes it the most lethal example of vigilante justice in American history. And in the summer of 1863, there were a couple murders, there were several stagecoach robberies and attempted robberies. So vigilantes, people who took the law into their own hands. I have 20 German kids coming here soon, and they told me before that there's no equivalent to vigilante in German. There's no word from their translator. He's like, I don't know what you're talking about. So we had to go through this. But people that take the law into their own hands, they go after a guy named Red Yeager. Red spills the bean, tells them the sheriff's in charge. They hang Red. They rush over here and hang the sheriff and the 2 deputies January 10th, 1864. What do you do with somebody after you hang them?
Drag them through the streets?
Well, maybe not one like that in Butte, though. Display them first on the gallows out there, so you get up in the morning and the dead bodies are blowing around in the wind. And then you bring your bodies and you stick them in your store window. You put them on display to make sure everybody gets a chance to see it. Then they go after a guy named John, they hang the sheriff and the 2 deputies, they go after a guy named John Wagner. They hang him from the rafters of a building. Then they go after a guy named Joe Pisantia. His story never made any sense to me, because out of all these men they're hanging, the only person they ever report fighting back is this guy Joe. Vigilantes tried to get into his house. He shot 2 of them, killing 1. So the vigilantes took a short break to go confer with the Chief Justice of Idaho. This was Idaho at that point. So they go to see Sidney Edgerton. He just received a cannon from a wagon train from Minnesota. They borrow the cannon. They blow up Joe's house. House is on fire. Joe's injured. They drag him out and they kill him right then and there. They shot him. They weren't done. Now it turned into a frenzy. Then they hanged Joe. Then they said they shot him at least another 100 times. Finally take his body down, throw it into his house, and burn Joe with his house. There goes Joe. No, they're done for Bannack for the time being. They rush off to Virginia City. They hang 5 men simultaneous, all at the same time. They are going to now head north. They're going to go to Missoula and Deer Lodge and hang men at all these locations. Finally come back here in October, just before Halloween. They hang a man by the name of R.C. Raleigh. His nickname is Pegleg. Apparently the man lost portions of both feet to frostbite. They hanged him and another guy wrote, it was just an honest mistake. It's supposed to be a little funny. Joe, you know.
Why were they hanged?
Well, we don't know, because when you have to study history, one thing that vigilantes don't do, they don't write things down. They didn't write anything down so historians can go back and track them, because they didn't want anybody to know who they were, because they're illegal too. What you're reading on the wall comes from a man named Thomas Dimsdale. He wrote the first book published in Montana. It's called Vigilantes of Montana. He created a lot of mythology in the story. He wrote there was 102 murders in 8 months prior to the execution spree. There is absolutely no evidence of it. And you can go out there and count plenty of murders, but that doesn't come any place close to 102. The governor's wife picked up on the same number and she wrote it too, but she said, but yet the bodies have not been discovered. You know, how do you know they're dead if you can't find their bodies? He also wrote that Henry Plummer was 27 years old when he was executed here.
Fake news started about
Henry Plummer, he wrote in the beginning of his book as a marshal in California in 1852. That made him a 15-year-old marshal in California. There has to be some problems with this story. So it is a great story, and it's an important story. And for us here that are from Montana, it's the story that created Montana. I mean, it's a very important story to us. I'm going to tell these guys one more execution story that happened in Virginia City. They hang a guy named Jack Slade over there. Slade was very famous. He became more famous because Mark Twain knew him and wrote about him in a book called Roughing It. And Jack was a notorious character, said to have killed as many as 26 men. He gets kicked out of what's now Wyoming. He goes to Virginia City, and he scares the living daylights out of the town. They say Jack has to go. So they hang Jack, and Mrs. Slade was really angry. She wouldn't let her husband be buried there. And that posed a unique challenge. What do you do with your dead husband?
Put him in the window.
No, she pickled him.
Are you
Preserved him in a
serious?
coffin full of alcohol. Eventually the snow melted and Jack Slade is now part of the Salt Lake City Cemetery tour. It's a fun story. Henry Plummer, these guys live up by a place called Sun River, so the Great Falls people know where that is. Henry Plummer got married there. Henry Plummer, when he got to this town, I should start a little earlier. Henry Plummer was the Marshal of Nevada City, California. From there, he gets sentenced to prison in San Quentin. Gets out, another man dies, was time to leave California. He's in Nevada, another man died, time to leave. He ends up in a place we call Elk City, Idaho today. It was Elk City, Washington then. And another man died, time to leave there. Comes here, kills a man. The town tried him, acquitted him. 4 months later, they elected him sheriff.
Oh no.
A few weeks after that, he goes to Sun River and gets himself married. 6 months later, he gets executed. Wasn't a good year for Henry Plummer either. There's a lot of stuff to this story, and for you guys that are going to grow up here in Montana, you're going to read this story a lot of times. It'll keep coming back to you when you're in 8th grade, when you're in high school, when you're in college. The story keeps coming back. You never get done with it here. But it's a fun story. It is.